We learn that relevancy is critical. Relevancy, cultural relevancy, family structure relevancy, this is a critical component in boosting an interest in reading for the kids in those classrooms and programs.
It's important to be part of a union because you have to have a voice.
Welcome to Union Talk. I'm Randi Weingarten.
I'm Randi Weingarten, and this is Union Talk. And this episode is one of the most fun ones that I get to have because as president of the AFT, I've had the privilege to do lots of fantastic things and meet lots of fantastic people. I often say when people talk about my job and how hard it is, I say, nope, I have one of the best jobs in life. How many other people can every single day fight for kids and their knowledge and fight for adults and making sure that they have a better life? And so I feel very blessed in terms of what I do. But one of the best things I do was something that we started in 2011 with meeting with one of the guests that are on this podcast today, Kyle Zimmer. And that meeting was with an entity she created called First Book. And it was about books and how do we get books in the hands of kids who need them. Books that are paperback, books that are hardback, books that you can actually put your hands on and your eyeballs on, not in the Kindle, not an e-book, but real physical books. So that was 2011. And on May 11th, we handed out our 10th millionth book to kids and to communities. That was one of the most awesome days I have ever had. And that's because of this partnership with First Book and because of local leaders like Brant, Duncan, who's also with me today, because this doesn't just happen from Washington. It may be a great idea, and Kyle is fantastic as his First Book, but we're talking about 50 million kids in the United States of America in schools that dot communities all throughout the country. And so if the membership doesn't buy into this and see its importance, it's not going to happen much. And one of those local leaders, he's now the Secretary-Treasurer of AFT Massachusetts, that is, but one of those local leaders was and is Brant Duncan, who was elected as Secretary-Treasurer in 2016, but before that, started his career in Lynn Public Schools as a para and then as an elementary and middle school teacher and a teacher teaching tech and mathematics, and became the head of our Lynn chapter. And why am I focused on this so much? Because Brant, like 699 other local leaders, 700 local leaders through the AFT have said this idea of giving kids books, of creating classroom libraries for teachers, this is so powerful as an idea that helps ignite reading, the joy of reading, the confidence of reading, which is so important for kids to access knowledge and to love knowledge. So that's why I asked Brant and Kyle to be with me today as we talk about and celebrate that the AFT and First Book have just handed out over this last essentially decade 10 million books for children, for families, and for educators. So, as others ban books, we hand them out. As others complain about the state of our schools in this nation or that kids are not as literate as they ought to be, we take the steps and walk the walk to make that happen because, yes, of course, we need the tools of teaching literacy and the science of reading, but the joy of reading is the key to transformation of a young child to a proficient reader to then being able, as we say, to have reading opens the world. So that's why I wanted the two of you with me today. And Kyle and Brant, welcome to Union Talk. And so Kyle, you were with me this weekend.
I was.
Where in one single day, we handed out about 150,000 books in New York City. You and I were in New York City at the UFT, in Florida, in Illinois, in Ohio, and in Texas. And so just for a minute, just gush with me about what it meant to you, about what we've done together, because neither one of us, I mean, we didn't know each other before that first meeting. And look what the AFT and First Book have now done together. So what's the impact to you about this?
I think it's hard to really wrap my head around the total impact because as I've gone through these years of working with you and AFT, Randy, the heroes of the story are the AFT teachers who are out there caring deeply about every kid in their classroom, about their families and caregivers. And that's really why we started First Book in the first place, is to feed resources to and celebrate and support educators formally in the classroom, informally, in all the other different settings. It was to celebrate and support the heroes and to see it happen and know that it's happened 10 million times. It's like I haven't touched the ground since that event. It's extraordinary.
Thank you, Kyle. And I'm going to get back to at one point or another, how you do this. Like, what's the strategy and also what is the secret sauce between you and the publishing companies that enable us to do this? Because I'm sure our listeners want to hear about that. But let me go to Brant first, because Brant, when we were in New York City this weekend, just like in any First Book event that we do, the books come the night before on some kind of tractor, truck. We have to have a bunch of people, volunteers that help us put them together. We didn't know on Friday it's going to be raining on Saturday or not. So we made sure that a lot of what we were doing was inside. Thank God Saturday was a beautiful day. So we're using the cafeteria at Graphics Communication Arts High School, but we also were able to use the outside for a fair-like atmosphere. But in the UFT that has, a couple of 100,000 members, we had lots of volunteers. I was there, Friday night or Friday afternoon helping to put the books out. We had lots of volunteers doing all that work. But you, my friend, in AFT Mass, Lynn is smaller than New York City. It's a couple of thousand teachers, not 200,000. You'll tell me the exact number. But Massachusetts, the whole state entity, is also smaller. And yet in Lynn and in Massachusetts itself, I just want to give people the number. You have helped the state distribute over 700,000 books in this last decade. That's a lot of books. That's a lot of impact. So why was this so meaningful to you? And how did you become such an evangelist on this work?
Well, you're so kind, Randy, and thanks for having me. It's really been an honor and transformational for us as a union, to give back to the community and the kids. And, we look at Massachusetts and a lot of things are happening, and we're doing a lot of great things in Massachusetts, but a lot of our kids are struggling, and, they're struggling with the impacts of poverty. And we found that our ability to deliver books to our students and our kids does a couple of things, right? It reinforces our relationships between educators and students, but also talks about the importance of literacy and how that's a skill that will, carry on for for decades for kids. And in Lynn, we're a larger district, but much smaller than New York City, obviously. We're about 18,000 students in Lynn and, over 80% high need students. So there's tremendous need. When we brought these book trucks into Lynn, everybody's like, well, what's a book truck? It's hard to visualize it until you see it, right? And you can quantify 40,000 books, but, what does 40,000 books look like, right? So to have that much of an impact and work with community partners and develop relationships with management and elected officials and really connect with your members, all of our teachers and paraprofessionals get into this work to help kids. And, particularly in our gateway cities in Massachusetts, where we have high concentrations of poverty and, some of the challenges that kids face are really complex and difficult. But to give them some books to take home, to read, to share, read to their cousins, read to a younger sibling has really been transformational. And it's something that we're so proud of. When you said 700,000 books, I didn't really have that number until you shared it with me, but that's something that we're proud of and we continue to do. You probably can't see behind me, but there's about 5,000 books that we're bringing out to Springfield, Mass. At the end of the month, and in partnership with an early childhood center and President Kathy Mastronati. So, we've really leveraged this relationship with First Book and the AFT to engage our leaders to give back to the kids in a new and in a different way. And it's really been transformational. So thank you.
Thank you, Brant.
Fantastic.
And we wouldn't be able to do this, Kyle, without whatever kind of business relationship that you end up having with the publishers. Because if you go to Amazon or you go to Barnes & Noble or an independent bookstore, like the ones I like to use a lot, you're going to pay a lot more for the books than we in First Book are paying. And so we would not be able to do this if we were paying list price for the books. As Kyle knows, and now our listeners know, this comes from dues money. When we're talking about 1 million books a year, and we've, in the last 2 years, as others have banned books and have tried to censor education and are so fearful or want people to be so fearful of education, we've actually upped the number of books we have given out. And in the last 2 years, under our Reading Opens the World program, we've had 384 events distributing over 2 million books. And we've decided to do these events, to Brant's point. We used to distribute books in schools to kids alone, with their parents' permission. But now we like doing these events on weekends or after school, so that we really engage all of community, because it is, as Brant said, it's an effort to bring community together. So these become like community fairs, 384 of them in the last 2 years, and that doesn't include this weekend's. But without the mechanics of this and the financial mechanics of this, we would never be able to do this. So just a little bit, Kyle, of the origin story and what
Sure.
and how you have been able to be this basically hero and shiro of getting books to kids and communities.
Well, I think the driving force always behind First Book is recognizing the power of stories, right? Since we all were painting on cave walls to communicate, we've told each other stories. That's how we keep up with the news. That's how we share exciting things. That's how we inspire each other. And I, like most things that have horsepower in the world, they start with personal experience, right? And so I grew up in Appalachia. I was lucky enough to grow up in a house with lots of books. And so I personally know the power of that and how it opened doors for me. I then moved to D.C. to go to law school, and I had great experiences in Washington volunteering at like Martha's Table and really seeing heroes on the front lines. And when I started opening my eyes to that, I did maybe the smartest thing I've ever done in my life, which is take a few days off of my job and go around and meet teachers who were in the Washington area, who I could just go and sort of introduce myself to and say, what does it look like? Like, show me your library if there is one. Often there's not. Show me what your classroom looks like. Tell me what you wish you had. And over and over and over again, people who, and your lives have been dedicated to these people, Brant and Randi, both, who are working their hearts out on some of the most intractable, critical issues to the future of the country. And they're doing it without resources, without assets. And that was really motivating. And so we sit down with the publishers. I'm an attorney by training, a Washington lawyer, so I should apologize to one and all. But my brain is sort of wired with the private sector lens. And so I really started...
Thank God. We need somebody to be able to be wired to the private
someone
sector.
with a four-function calculator. It's killing me. But, I really sat down and started learning about the publishing industry because I didn't even have any clients in that industry, and realizing that the very design of the industry meant that the price point at retail was really only serving about the top 5 to 10% of the socioeconomic ladder in the U.S. And so everything we've built, and I will spare you the economic model description, but everything we've built has been built to crack that open and to say, how do we approach this as a business discussion with the publishers? They're running a business, and we want a profitable, vibrant publishing industry in the United States. We want that. So we went to them and basically said, you are missing a market for the lowest 30% of the economic pyramid. And because of your pricing designs, we propose to build that market, to buy hand-curated, the best, most diverse books, and we will buy them on a non-returnable basis so that we open up a new market for the publishers, but we do it at a price point that is far more accessible to the people who are, really need this.
And I think my recollection, because I have a great staff that gives me great facts, that since its founding, First Book has distributed more than 225 million books and education resources with a value of about $2 billion.
We have it. I'm happy to report that even your extraordinary staff missed the most recent update. And it's 250 million books we're now up to. And so, this is... and we want...
So 10 million is chump change.
No. Well, one thing to remember about our partnership, Randi, there are many things to remember, but a couple of things that are really, really important to note is the books, the 10 million books, take my breath away, and it's an extraordinary reach. It also has that invaluable community spirit, elevating community. And my goodness, we've never needed that more than we do right now, right? In addition to that, we have an online community of about 600,000 adults in the lives of kids in poverty. 1/3 of those members are AFT members. And so that means that 1/3 of everything we've done, this is a huge tail. This is a huge legacy piece to the work we've done together, Randi, because once they're members of ours, they'll get books far into the future. And
exactly
so
right.
It's 10 million directly handed out, but it's many, many million more than that as a result of our partnership.
And there's a lot of people that don't understand the kind of connectiveness between what the federal law does, like on Title I or on Career Tech Ed. I'm going to get to Brant on a question of Skills USA, or these other kinds of laws that we have that actually then help us get more resources in the hands of kids that might not otherwise have them, into the hands of marginalized communities. And so I wanted to ask two questions on two totally different sides of, or totally different age ranges. One is, pre-kindergarten and the other is high school kids. And I'm going to start with pre-kindergarten, but I'm going to then go to you, Brant, and talk about what the connection is to like the amazing Skills USA and CTE program that you have and, you know, the role that books play. But let me ask you, Kyle, this question first, because one of my favorite stats about reading, and you, in some of the work that we've done together, we've raised the issue that First Book researchers had seen, which is that reading scores do go up nationally every time kids read more books. And your team have been able to see either a causation or correlation with that. But there's other stats that show that if you read one book every day to your preschooler, by third grade, that preschooler would have had 300,000 more words than their peers. And that's the kind of access to learning and to books and to knowledge that actually helps kids connect reading and literacy and knowledge. So what do we do in terms of First Book AFT connection? How do we curate these books so that adults and families, when they go to the pre-kindergarten grouping of books, that they have books? How do we get those kind of books? And then also talk a little bit about the other things that we in First Book have done to try to create reading rooms and things like that.
Sure. There's a real breadth of both experience and impact in the partnership between First Book and AFT. I think it springs from a well where all of us are so completely aligned in the power and the commitment of educators and teachers and caregivers in public schools all over the country. And so it all springs from that. I will say that over and over and over again, and I sat through a briefing this morning on this, we learned that relevancy is critical. Relevancy, cultural relevancy, family structure relevancy, this is a critical component in boosting an interest in reading for the kids in those classrooms and programs. And not just that, but the teachers too. You know, we have heard very consistently almost a fear from the teachers who are classroom teachers, because whatever their cultural background is, they can't be everything. And they're often standing in front of, you know, rooms that look like the UN, wonderfully diverse, wonderful reflection of our country. But during this era, you know, there is fear and angst on behalf of the teachers who they want to connect with those kids. They want to bring their family stories, their culture into the classroom. And it's a danger. It's fraught. It can be a very, very troubling thing to do. So one more power tool that they have because of AFT's involvement with First Book is to bring wonderfully diverse books into those classrooms. It gives you an easy point of reference. It gives an easy way to share cultures, to share family structures. And we over and over and over again, as recent as this morning, I got additional data from our research arm that told us that educators are craving that, the diversity of content. So I think that's yet another home run that AFT has delivered to their members.
Thank you, Kyle. We're going to get to that diversity from what Brant did with Lynn Tech and 40,000 books. But before we get there, you just reminded me of a story that I heard on Saturday. A teacher came up to me, teacher and parent, or grandparent actually, and she said, thank you. And she was holding a book. The book is about Haitian culture and food. And the grandparent and teacher says to me, I've been coming to some of these giveaways for a while, and I have never seen a book about Haitian culture and food. Now, in New York City, there's a huge Haitian population. She was so grateful about it and about being able to use it on Mother's Day for her grandkids. that's what you're talking about in terms of diversity. And the other story from that day was, look, we had two authors with us, and Matthew Cherry, we had Daryl, who has been a first book author for a long time,
Right,
from Run DMC. But we had Matthew Cherry, who wrote Hair Love, a bestseller, and he gave it to a young gentleman who was the 10th millionth person to get, we gave the 10th millionth copy. And Matthew signed the copy of his book to an 8-year-old boy by the name of Oliver. But that book, Hair Love, which is a book about Black kids taking pride in their hair, has been banned in multiple places across the country, which we'll get to in a second. But this is the kind of diversity that kids see themselves in and families see themselves in. And when you have a family event like this, it starts, really undermining the extremists who say, what are you doing? Well, we're doing it with kids' families. But then you also have what we did in Lynn and Brant. Talk about the 40,000 book giveaway at Lynn Vocational School and how you tie it into workplace development and to older kids.
Sure, there's a lot of models, and I think we're close to 20 book truck giveaways here in Massachusetts. The Boston Teachers Union does an annual back-to-school event in partnership with the community. But the one that Randy references is one that we did at the Voc Tech in Lynn. And, it was incredible to partner with the district, the community. But one of the attributes of being at the Voc Tech school was the Skills USA kids, right? So, it's a remarkable group and organization, and they were really eager to partner with us and connect on many levels for the kids. So, one of the clever things that they did is they tied in a lot of the trades in terms of providing supports for the families and kids. They had the culinary produce, culturally relevant food for the kids the day of the distribution. They had the carpentry folks build little bookcases for kids to take home. The early childhood folk kids coordinated small group reading visits. So it was kind of like a tiered level of support, right? So the core was giving away the 40,000 plus books, but the connections to the CTE and the relevance for the kids in the various shops was to produce a product that would help lift up literacy and make the connection to CTE and the value in that. And, you reminded me in talking about this, one of the book distributions that we did at the folk school, we had everything set up on Thursday. And one of the programs at the school was a special ed classroom, and the other was an early childhood classroom. And we were able to bring those kids through the space where we had the 40,000 books Friday morning. So picture, a couple of young people, seeing 40,000 books and then having the opportunity to pick a few of them to take home, and the smile on the kids' faces and the pride of the students and the educators to make this a reality and working with the elected officials. And it's transformational, as I mentioned before. But, the CTE kids are really eager to help. And the idea is to create the bookcases and different connections for the kids. Really, really did a wonderful, wonderful job for the distribution.
So I want to get to our last question, which is about to be, we are talking about books. So I want to talk about and ask both of you what book has had the most impact on you. But before I do that, I'm a student of history. So, I read about book banning, book burning. I've watched it in terms of these cultural fights in the last few years. But for the life of me, I don't really understand what would be the push to censor and ban books. And in answering that question, I'm going to ask both of you what you think it is. I mean, I have my theories about the fear of knowledge, but clearly I think this is a good strategy of combating that because we're getting knowledge and a joy of knowledge to people. But give me your sense of why are we going through this period where there are some who try to censor and ban books?
I have to say, I think you're right, Randy. I think a lot of it is fear-based. It's hard for me to imagine a rationale that makes sense. I will tell you what it's not based on. It's not based on fact and data. It is a fact-free movement. And I think, just last year, I know that you're aware of this, First Book Research and Insights, our research arm, released a couple of studies. One was a 6-month study in 450 classrooms where we did a pre-study about what books were available in those classroom libraries, and then we gave every classroom $250 to spend on diverse books on the First Book Marketplace. And then we watched what happened, and we checked in and evaluated along the way. And what we found was that collectively, the reading in those classrooms jumped 4 hours a week, and their reading scores jumped 3 points over even higher than anticipated elevations from a regular school year. So it's extraordinary to me that you take away the most powerful tool from people who are working their heart and souls out to make kids readers, to make them love learning. And it's not, it even flies in the face of the data that we generated last year. And so it's a deeply troubling thing. I do think there are racial implications and cultural implications, because you can't miss the pattern that fully 50% of the books that are on these lists are by Black and brown authors and gay and lesbian themes and gay and lesbian family structures. And so, I think there's a lot of negative stuff and fear that's been stirred into the same pot, but it is free of data. It's free of any fact. So I suspect it's fear that's fueling it.
Yeah.
I kind of would agree with you, Kyle, that it is fear, and, people think of Massachusetts as a progressive state in a lot of ways, but there are movements of censorship. And, so much so our librarians, we represent about 700 municipal librarians in Massachusetts under the Massachusetts Library Staff Association. So we have both public and school-based librarians, and affirming our position through a resolution at our last convention was something that we passed unanimously, and, in support of intellectual freedom and, opposing censorship and, opposing book bans was something that really resonated with folks. And what we referenced earlier about the diversity of the books and the relevance to the kids, our gateway cities, largely where AFT locals are in Massachusetts, are very diverse, and we're so proud of it. And one of the things that we're intentional about is, bringing books into the schools, many times in partnerships with mayors and superintendents and union leaders, and asking them to jointly read to the kids. And the value and the relevance is incredible. Not only do they see the leaders in their school communities reading these diverse books, but they also get to take them home and to share them with their families. So it's a multi-layered approach, but it's something that we're really proud to do.
Randi, if I can just add one thought, in our country, the issues that we struggle the most with are issues when we somehow decide that there's an us and a them. When it's housing and poverty, when it was HIV, and when there's the ability to, in the collective consciousness, to wall a group of people off and say that's their problem, we fail at those issues very consistently. And this is one, educating our kids, turning them into readers and thinkers and dreamers. This is one that there should be no walls. And so we've got to be careful about addressing this censorship issue, because the stronger it is, the higher that wall gets, and it turns into an us and them. And those are the issues we don't solve.
Yeah. Well said, both of you. And I think part of the reason I wanted just to raise it is because I think that what we've done as an AFT and what First Book has done is that we've said, essentially, reading does open the world. and we're going to create access to books. And those books, just like interactions in classrooms, just like interactions in communities, it creates a sense of the world and a sense of self in the world, and communications and confidence and critical thinking and nuance and rejecting the binary and all the things that we know help create basic humanity. And, that's part of what we're doing. And by having these events, it's a joyful event around reading. And, I'll say at the end what we said at the beginning, the fact that even in the last 2 years, without this weekend, so this weekend, let's say it was 384, we're up to 390. There's 390 events in 2 years. There's 52 weeks in a year, 390 events in the last 2 years. It says a lot about the engagement of our members and of communities, like Brant said, about mayors and others, in this endeavor to both bring communities together, do it in a relevant way, do it in a joyful way, and where kids and families see themselves in books and in reading. And it leads me to my last question, which is, okay, we have two amazing readers here who love books. So what book, I'll start with you, Brant, what book has had the most impact on you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm chuckling thinking about it, but one of our members was upset that the mayor never spent much time in our schools. So I approached the issue, and we bought Amelia Bedelia for Mayor, which is a wonderful, cute book on the First Book Marketplace. And we began doing reading visits. And it was a tremendous opportunity just to bring the mayor into the school and to see all the good things happening. But I guess for my favorite, it's Alma and How She Got Her Name, which is a First Book Marketplace special edition. If you haven't read it or heard about it, go check it out. It's an early elementary school, and it's a young lady that has 6 names, and she's really perplexed about having 6 names because everybody else has a few fewer. But going through some research through her family tree, she realizes that each one of the names is a special part of her. And when we read these books, like Alma, to kids in our gateway cities, they make connections because they're relevant and they're diverse. And it's about a young lady telling her story and talking about her path forward. So it celebrates the diversity, celebrates the history, but also emphasizes the importance of moving forward with confidence. So I'd have to say Alma is probably my favorite at the moment.
I love that. And since my grandkids have many, many, many names, I am going to get this book for my 2 grandbabies.
I love it. I love it.
Kyle.
So I have always loved this question, and I have about 35 answers, but I will, and you guys are going to have to cancel your dinner plans, but I'll tell you just a quick note that it always makes me think about, there's a poem called The First Book, and it's by a woman named Rita Dove, who was the poet laureate for the United States. And it's about not necessarily the very first book you read when you're little, but it's about the first book that really grabs you and really makes you a reader and love stories and storytelling. And so I highly recommend that poem just because thematically it'll make us all happy. There is a book from a long time ago called The Good Earth by Pearl Buck.
Oh,
and
wow.
The Good Earth is exactly the book I thought of the first time I read Rita Dove's poem, because she was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize in literature. She was an American, but she lived her whole life in China, and it crossed cultural boundaries, and it brought in a strength of a writer who was one of the early highly recognized women. So I would go with The Good Earth.
Wow. And it wouldn't surprise either one of you that I'm going to talk about Blanche Weisencook's books about Eleanor, which I adore and which have taught me a lot about her leadership and how she accomplished things and how she brought people together to do that. And frankly, the 2 of you are in that mold, the way of really bringing people together, thinking about community, thinking about freedom, thinking about democracy, pushing and bringing people together, pushing and bringing people together. And so I just really want to say, both to Brant and to Kyle, thank you for joining us today as we talk about the importance of giving out 10 million books, not just the celebration of it, but the importance of it for our kids' education, the importance of it for community, the importance of it for pluralism, the importance of it for seizing our future, both individually for our kids as well as collectively as a nation. And for those of you who would like any more information about our Reading Opens the World campaign, we had an episode about that in December 2022. You can also go to aft.org/read for resources. You can go to First Book at firstbook.org. You can go to AFT Massachusetts at ma.aft.org. But in the meantime, grab a book, read to a kid, do one of the things Kyle and I did one of the first times we met, which is in West Virginia, give books out to kids, and just actually experience the joy of opening up the world to a youngster by reading. Thank you, everybody.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Union Talk. Remember to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast and tune in every other week for a new episode. Thank you, be safe, and be well.